In the summer of 1958, China's fields buzzed with the promise of progress. The communist government's call for industrialization had opened factory jobs in distant cities, a rare ladder out of rural hardship. At a sun-scorched train station in Henan, dust swirled around a cluster of young villagers, their faces taut with hope and nerves. Among them stood Lena, a slight, sharp-eyed woman of 20, clutching a referral letter stained with sweat. Her dark braids swung as she scanned the platform, her heart thumping with the weight of a dream. A job at the state-run textile factory in Zhengzhou, a chance to escape the bone-deep poverty of her village. Like those of her companions, Lena's letter was no mere paper. It was a hard-won prize earned through her father's sacrifice. John Liang, a war martyr, had died in 1945, charging a Japanese tank with explosives. His name is now etched in the county's martyr cemetery. That legacy secured Lena's spot, a nod to the government's pledge to honor heroes' families. Around her, others gripped similar letters. Mike, whose father perished in a mine collapse, Lee, whose mother had been a resistance courier, and a dozen more, each tied to a story of loss and contribution. In the 1950s, such letters were golden tickets, gate-kept by a bureaucracy that prized loyalty and sacrifice. At Lena's side stood Luke, her fiancé, his broad shoulders squared with the confidence of the village chief's son. His referral letter, secured through Lena's martyr status, marked him as her future husband, a match arranged by the chief's family, who had taken Lena in after her grandfather's death. To outsiders, it was a kind gesture, but Lena knew better. The chief's household had claimed her father's pension and land, raising her as little more than a servant to secure their inheritance. Luke's charm, once a flicker of warmth in her lonely childhood, now felt hollow, his gaze often drifting elsewhere. That elsewhere was Susan, a willowy girl with a coy smile who hadn't yet joined the group. Luke's eyes darted to the path by the river where Susan had gone to freshen up, as if the train's schedule bent to her whims. The platform vibrated with the train's idling engine, its sharp whistle cutting through the humid air. Lena's stomach knotted. This was the last train to Zhengzhou for months. Miss it, and they'd be trapped in the village, their dreams of factory wages and city lights snuffed out. "Luke, we need to board," Lena said, her voice low but firm, brushing off the dust clinging to her faded jacket. The other villagers murmured agreement, their impatience growing. Mike, his face etched with worry, clutched his letter like a lifeline. "My ma's counting on me," he muttered. "I can't stay stuck here." Lee, her eyes fierce, added, "We've waited years for this." "Susan's not our problem," Luke waved them off, planting himself at the platform's edge. "Susan's got a letter too. We're not leaving without her." His tone carried the weight of his father's authority, a reminder of the chief's role in securing extra factory spots through county connections. Lena's jaw tightened. Susan's letter, like Luke's, rode on Lena's father's name. Susan claimed to be John Liang's goddaughter, a lie propped up by the chief. Lena had never challenged it, bound by years of obligation to the family that saved her. The train's whistle shrieked again, and the conductor bellowed, "Final call!" Panic rippled through the group. Lena's mind raced, picturing the factory's humming looms, the promise of steady pay, and a life beyond the village's endless toil. She glanced at Luke, his stance unyielding, then at the villagers, their faces a mix of fear and fury. Mike stepped forward, fists clenched. "Luke, move or I'll make you." Luke's hand twitched toward his pocket where the group's referral letters were tucked, a power he wielded like a weapon. Lena's heart pounded, and her father's memory was a quiet fire in her chest. She couldn't let Luke's obsession with Susan doom them all. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. She grabbed Luke's arm, her grip fierce. "Mike, Lee, help me!" Together they surged forward, dragging Luke toward the train's open door. He cursed, thrashing against them, but the villagers' desperation fueled their strength. Lena's boots scraped the platform as they hauled him aboard, the door slamming shut behind them. The train lurched forward, wheels grinding against the tracks. Lena collapsed against a seat, her breath ragged, the referral letter crumpled in her fist. Mike slumped beside her, muttering, "Thanks, Lena, you saved us." Lee nodded, her eyes softening, but Luke, sprawled across from them, glared at Lena, his face dark with resentment. "You left her," he spat. "Susan needed me." Lena met his gaze, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "We all needed this train." Outside, the Henan fields blurred past, carrying them toward Zhengzhou, an uncertain future. Lena didn't know then that her courage would spark Luke's hatred, or that Susan's absence would set a tragedy in motion. But at that moment, as the train rattled on, she felt a spark of agency, a glimpse of a life she might yet claim. The Zhengzhou textile factory was a fortress of clattering looms and hope, its brick walls contrasting with the Henan mud huts Lena had known. By late 1958, she and Luke had settled into their roles as workers, their referral letters earning them spots among the hum of cotton threads and the chatter of city dreams. Lena, now 20, found solace in the rhythm of the machines, each spool a step toward a life she could call her own. Her wages, though modest, bought her a small cot in the women's dormitory and a flicker of independence from the village chief's family, who had long tethered her to their greed. Luke, however, was a shadow of the man she'd once admired. His charm had curdled into sullenness, his eyes often fixed on the horizon as if searching for something, or someone, left behind. Strayed in the village after missing the train, Susan had become a ghost between them. Lena learned through letters that Susan's fate had been grim. Married off to an aging widower, she bore 2 children in 3 years, her health fraying with each birth. In 1961, during her 3rd childbirth, complications claimed her life. The village, steeped in tradition, gave her a ghost marriage, binding her spirit to a dead man's name. The news reached the factory in a crumpled note, and Luke's face went blank, his silence louder than any words. Lena tried to bridge the gap, her heart heavy with guilt for dragging Luke onto the train. She deserved better, she said softly one evening, sitting across from him in the factory canteen. Luke's fork froze, his knuckles whitening. "You don't get to say that," he growled. "You forced me to leave her." Lena flinched, the accusation cutting deeper than she'd expected. She had saved him, saved them all, but his resentment grew like a weed, choking the bond they'd once shared. Their wedding was set for spring 1962, a formality to seal the chief's claim on Lena's martyr's pension and land. Lena, raised to obey, saw it as her duty, though her heart ached for the boy Luke had been, not the man he'd become. The night before the ceremony, she sat alone in her dorm, fingering her father's old photo, his stern face softened by a faint smile. John Liang, the martyr who died for China's liberation, was her anchor. His sacrifice was the reason she stood here. She whispered, "I'll make you proud," unaware of the storm brewing. The wedding night came, a simple affair in the factory's communal hall, marked by rice wine and forced smiles. In a borrowed red dress, Lena felt the weight of eyes, workers, villagers, and Luke's cold stare. Lena hoped for a moment of connection in their shared room, a cramped space with a single bulb. Instead, Luke's face twisted as he shut the door. "You think you're some hero, don't you?" he said, his voice low and venomous. "Susan suffered because of you. She died because you couldn't wait." Lena's breath caught. "Luke, I saved us. The train was our only shot." Her words were steady, but fear crept into her chest. Luke stepped closer, his eyes bloodshot, not from wine, but from a rage that had festered for years. "You saved yourself," he spat. "Susan was my heart, and you tore her from me." Before Lena could react, he pulled a hemp rope from his pocket, its coarse fibers glinting in the dim light. Her heart pounded as he lunged, looping it around her neck with terrifying speed. The rope bit into her skin, cutting off her air. Lena clawed at it, her nails scraping his hands, but Luke's strength was relentless. "Your cold heart doomed her," he snarled, tightening the knot. "Why do you get to live while she's gone?" Stars burst behind Lena's eyes, her lungs screaming. She thought of her father, his photo on the table, his sacrifice now mocked by this betrayal. Her body weakened, her vision blurring, and in that final moment, a warmth enveloped her, soft as a summer breeze. A light bloomed, and her father, John Liang, stood in a field of golden wheat, his uniform pristine, his voice, calm and deep, cut through the pain. "Live again, my child. Seek justice." Lena's heart surged with his words, a supernatural gift tied to his martyr's legacy, revered in a China that honored its heroes with almost sacred devotion. In the 1950s, stories of martyr spirits guiding the living were whispered in villages, and now Lena felt that power. The rope, the room, Luke's rage, they all dissolved as the light pulled her back, her soul rewinding to a moment 3 years prior. She opened her eyes, gasping, On the Henan train platform, the summer of 1958 restored. The train's whistle pierced the air, and Luke stood before her, his gaze fixed on the river path where Susan would soon appear. Lena's hands trembled, the phantom burn of the rope still raw on her neck. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a beacon of purpose. She wasn't just alive, she was reborn, armed with the truth of Luke's betrayal and the pain of her death. Tears pricked her eyes, not from fear, but from a resolve as fierce as her father's final charge. Around her, the villagers' voices rose, Mike's desperation, Lee's impatience, all familiar yet distant. Lena touched her neck, steadying her breath. She had once dragged Luke onto the train, sacrificing her heart to save him. But this time, her father's gift gave her a choice. Justice, not duty, would guide her. As Luke sneered, "What's the rush?" Lena's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. The train's wheels groaned, and she knew this was where her fight began. The Henan train platform buzzed with restless energy under the scorching sun of July 1958. Dust clung to Lena's faded jacket as she stood among the villagers, their referral letters crinkling in sweaty palms. The train to Zhengzhou, a lifeline to factory jobs and city dreams, idled with a low rumble, its whistle sharp and urgent. Lena, reborn through her father's martyr legacy, felt the weight of her past life's death. Luke's rope around her neck, his betrayal for Susan, burning in her chest. Her hands trembled, not from the heat but from the memory of her murder, now a vivid scar on her soul. Luke, her fiancé, and the village chief's son stood at the platform's edge, his broad frame blocking the path to the train. Sharp with defiance, his eyes scanned the river trail where Susan had gone to freshen up. The villagers' murmurs grew frantic. Mike, his face etched with worry, gripped his letter, earned through his father's death in a mind collapse. "Luke, we're out of time," he snapped, his voice thick with fear of another year in the village's grinding poverty. Lee, a wiry girl whose mother had died for the resistance, added that Susan was not worth missing this chance. Lena's gaze locked on Luke, her heart pounding with dread and fury. In her past life, she'd dragged him onto the train, saving him and the others at the cost of Susan's fate, and her own life. The memory of his bloodshot eyes, his venomous words, "You doomed Susan," clawed at her. Her father's voice, a warm echo from her rebirth, urged her to seek justice. In 1950s China, martyrs like John Liang were near sacred, and their families were granted rare opportunities like factory quotas. Lena's letter, tied to her father's name, was her birthright, but Luke and Susan had exploited it, their lies propped up by the chief's influence. The train's whistle shrieked a final warning. Lena's fingers brushed her neck, the phantom rope's sting lingering. She stepped toward Luke, her voice low but steady. "We need to board. Now." Her words carried the weight of her past life's sacrifice, but Luke waved her off, his tone dripping scornfully. "Susan's got a letter too. We wait." He patted his pocket, where the group's referral letters rested, a power entrusted to him as the chief's son, a decision the villagers now cursed in hushed tones. Mike's fists clenched, his voice breaking. "My ma's sick. This job's all we've got." Lee's eyes blazed. "You're the chief's son, Luke, but you don't own us." The villagers' desperation was palpable, their dreams of city wages and respect hinging on this moment. In the 1950s, factory jobs were a ticket to stability in a nation rebuilding after war and revolution. But quotas were tight and reserved for those with connections or sacrifices. The group's letters, earned through their families' losses, were their only leverage, and Luke held them hostage. Lena's mind raced, her reborn knowledge a double-edged sword. She saw Luke's future betrayal, his love for Susan, his hatred for Lena, unfold like a map. Her instinct screamed to act, to haul him aboard as she had before. But her father's gift, the chance to relive this moment, offered another path. Justice, not duty. She closed her eyes, picturing her father's photo, his stern face softened by pride. She whispered, "I won't save you again," her resolve hardening like steel. Luke turned, catching her stillness. "What's the rush, Lena?" he sneered, his voice laced with mockery. "In a hurry to reincarnate? I've got all the letters. If you're so capable, board without me." His words stung, a reminder of his control, but Lena felt a spark of freedom. Her raw and jagged fear mingled with growing anger, not just at Luke, but but at herself for years of unquestioning loyalty. She'd been raised in the chief's household, an orphan tethered to their greed, her father's pension siphoned to fund their comfort while she scrubbed their floors. The conductor's shout, "Final call," cut through the chaos. The villagers surged forward, their voices a desperate chorus. Mike grabbed Luke's arm, but Luke shook him off, his hand hovering over his pocket. "Back off, or nobody goes," he warned. Lee's face twisted with frustration, but she hesitated, her letter in Luke's grasp. Lena stood rooted, her heart a storm of grief and clarity. She saw the train not as salvation, but as a trap that had led to her death. Letting Luke choose his fate meant letting go of her old self, the girl who sacrificed everything for others. She stepped back, her boots scuffing the dusty platform. "Do what you want, Luke," she said, her voice calm, almost cold. The villagers gasped, Mike's eyes widening. "Lena, what are you doing?" he hissed. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. He's made his choice. Inside, her emotions churned, fear of the unknown, anger at Luke's betrayal, and a fragile hope that her father's gift would guide her. The train's wheels groaned, inching forward, and Lena's decision crystallized. This time, she would not pull Luke from the edge. She would let him fall, and in that act, begin to reclaim her life. The Henan train platform baked under the July 1958 sun, the air thick with dust and desperation. The train to Zhengzhou, a steel promise of factory jobs, idled with a restless hum, its whistle a ticking clock. Lena stood among the villagers, her reborn heart heavy with the memory of Luke's rope around her neck, his betrayal for Susan seared into her soul. Her decision to let Luke face his consequences had left her still, a quiet rebellion against the duty that once defined her. Around her, the group's anxiety boiled, their referral letters, passports to a life beyond the village's toil, held hostage by Luke's whims. Luke, the village chief's son, loomed at the platform's edge, his eyes fixed on the river path where Susan dawdled. His hand rested on his pocket, where the group's referral letters were tucked, a power entrusted to him by his father's influence. In 1950s China, factory jobs were rare, reserved for those with martyr ties or bureaucratic favor, and the chief had leveraged Lena's father's name, John Liang, a war hero, to secure extra quotas. Luke's control over the letters made him untouchable, a petty tyrant cloaked in privilege. Mike, his face taut with worry, stepped forward, his letter earned through his father's death in a coal mine collapse. "Luke, the train's leaving. Give us our letters." His voice cracked, the weight of his mother's illness driving his plea. Lee, whose mother had smuggled messages for the resistance, clutched her letter, her eyes blazing. "You're not our boss. Hand them over." The villagers' voices rose, a chorus of fear and fury. They knew the stakes, miss this train, and they'd be trapped in the village, their dreams of city wages crushed by the era's rigid quotas. Lena's gaze flickered to Luke, her stomach knotting with dread and resolve. Her past life's pain, Luke's hatred, Susan's lies, pulsed like a wound. She recalled the chief's household, where she'd been adopted as an orphan to secure her father's pension and land. Raised as a servant, she'd scrubbed floors while Susan, falsely claiming to be John's goddaughter, wore new dresses funded by Lena's inheritance. Her father's voice, a warm echo from her rebirth, urged her to seek justice. In a nation that revered martyrs, her father's legacy was her shield, and she would wield it. Luke's sneer cut through the clamor. "Push me, and I'll burn them all." He pulled a match from his pocket, striking it with a sharp flick. The tiny flame danced inches from the brown envelope in his hand. Gasps rippled through the group. Mike's fists clenched, his voice low. "My ma needs medicine. You'd damn us for Susan?" Lee's face twisted. "She's not even here. Why are we paying for her?" The villagers' desperation was raw, their reliance on Luke a bitter pill. They'd trusted him, swayed by his father's status, only to face his betrayal. Lena's heart raced, her reborn knowledge a heavy burden. She saw Luke's future, his love for Susan, his murder of her, unfold like a dark prophecy. Her instinct to act, to seize the letters, warred with her father's call for justice. She touched the locket at her neck, a relic of her grandfather, and closed her eyes. The memory of her death, the rope's bite, surged forward, but so did her resolve. She wasn't the girl who'd saved Luke at her own cost. This time, she'd let his choices bury him. "Luke, stop this," Lena said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "You're risking everything." Her words were a test, probing for a shred of the boy she'd once loved. Luke's eyes met hers, cold and unyielding. "You're all selfish," he snapped. "Susan's one of us. Her letter is with me. We leave together or not at all." He waved the envelope, the matches flamed dangerously close. The villagers froze, their hope teetering on his whim. Mike's shoulders slumped, his anger giving way to despair. Lee muttered, "We should have kept our letters." Lena's mind churned, piecing together her past life's truths. The chief had used her father's name to secure Luke and Susan's spots, exploiting the government's martyr policies. Susan's goddaughter's claim, backed by a forged letter, was a lie Lena had never challenged, bound by years of gratitude and fear. Now, reborn, she saw the chief's household for what it was, a den of thieves who'd stolen her inheritance while parading as her saviors. Her anger flared, not just at Luke, but at her silence. The train's whistle screamed, the conductor shouting, "Board now!" The villagers surged, their voices a desperate plea. Mike grabbed Luke's arm, but Luke yanked free, holding the match higher. "One more step, and we all stay here." His voice was a blade, cutting through their hope. Lee's eyes darted to Lena, a silent question. "Do something." Lena's chest tightened, her fear of losing the factory job clashing with her newborn purpose. She saw her father's face in her mind, his sacrifice a beacon. "I won't repeat my mistakes," she whispered, her resolve a quiet fire. She stepped back, her boots scuffing the platform. "You've made your choice, Luke," she said, her voice calm, masking the fury within. The villagers gasped, Mike's eyes wide. "Lena, we need those letters," he hissed. She met his gaze, her expression firm. "He's not our savior." Inside, her emotions roiled, grief for her lost trust, anger at Luke's tyranny, and a fragile hope that her silence would spark his downfall. The train's wheels groaned, and Lena's decision locked into place. She would not bend to Luke's will. She would watch him unravel, her path to justice beginning with this act of defiance. The Henan train platform shimmered with heat in July 1958, the air heavy with dust and the sharp tang of coal smoke. The train to Zhengzhou, a steel lifeline to factory jobs, groaned on its tracks, its whistle a relentless countdown. Lena stood among the villagers, her reborn soul scarred by Luke's betrayal, his rope around her neck, his devotion to Susan. Her decision to let Luke face his consequences had left her silent, a quiet defiance against the duty that once chained her. The group's referral letters, their escape from rural poverty, were still clutched in Luke's hand, his match a flickering threat to their dreams. Luke, the village chief's son, held his ground, eyes locked on the river path where Susan lingered. The villagers' desperation crackled like static. Mike, whose father's death in a mine collapse had earned his letter, gripped his cap, his voice raw. "Luke, you're killing us. My ma's coughing blood. She needs this job's pay." Lee, her mother, a fallen resistance fighter, snapped. "Susan was not our problem. Please give us the letters." In 1950s China, factory jobs were a rare bridge across the rural-urban divide, reserved for those with martyr ties or elite connections. These letters, secured through their families' sacrifices, were their only shot at a life beyond the fields. Lena's heart thudded, the phantom burn of Luke's rope a constant reminder of her past life's end. Her father's voice, a warm echo from her rebirth, urged her to seek justice. John Liang's martyr status had won her this chance, but Luke and Susan had exploited it, their lies woven into the chief's greed. Lena's fingers brushed her locket, her grandfather's keepsake, as she fought the urge to act. Her past self would have wrestled Luke aboard, but her reborn resolve whispered patience. Justice is required to let Luke's choices unravel him. The train's whistle shrieked, the conductor's shout, "Last call!" A knife through the tension. Luke's match flared, inches from the envelope of letters. "One more step, and we all stay," he growled, his eyes daring the group. Mike's face twisted with fury, but fear of losing his letter held him back. Lee's voice trembled. "We trusted you, Luke. You're betraying us all." The villagers' reliance on Luke, born of his father's clout, was now a noose, their hope dangling by his whim in a nation where bureaucratic favor trumped merit. Then, a figure emerged from the river path. Susan's skirt rolled up, face flushed, a small mirror in hand as she checked her reflection. She sauntered toward the platform, her casual smile contrasting the group's panic. "What's the rush?" she said, her voice lilting. The train doesn't have wings. Her nonchalance was a slap, her delay a theft of their future. Mike's jaw clenched, his voice low. Your damn face washings cost us everything. Lee's eyes narrowed. Do you think you're special because Luke says so? Lena's gaze fixed on Susan, her anger flaring. In her past life, Susan's absence had led to her tragic fate. Marriage to a widower, death in childbirth. But Lena now saw her arrogance, her complicity in the chief's schemes. Susan's goddaughter claim, a lie to siphon Lena's father's pension, had funded her new dresses while Lena went hungry. Her father's legacy, sacred in a China that enshrined martyrs, was a tool for Susan's ambition. Lena's grief, for her stolen childhood, her murdered self, mingled with a cold resolve. She would not save Susan or Luke this time. Luke's match flickered out, his face softening as Susan reached him. You're here, he said, relief in his voice. He tucked the envelope away, his authority restored by her presence. The villagers' shouts grew frantic, but the train's doors slammed shut with a metallic clang. The engine roared, wheels grinding as it pulled away, its taillights fading into the haze. Silence crashed over the platform, broken only by Lee's stifled sob and Mike's muttered curse. The missed train was a collective wound. Their dreams of Zhengzhou's factories were snuffed out. Mike rounded on Susan, his voice a snarl. Happy now? Your vanity screwed us all. Lee's hands shook, her letter useless without the train. We're stuck because of you! Susan flinched, hiding behind Luke, her mirror slipping to the ground. Luke's arm went around her, his glare sweeping the group. Back off. We'll find another way. His promise was hollow, his control fraying as the villagers' anger turned on him. In a society where collective effort was preached, his selfishness was a betrayal, and their trust in the chief's son shattered. Lena stood apart, her face calm, masking the storm within. She said I hadn't visited my grandpa's grave, her voice flat, almost distant. Missing this isn't so bad. The words were a shield, hiding her growing plan. Mike's eyes flashed with disbelief. Lena, you're giving up? She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I'm choosing what matters. Inside, her emotions churned, grief for the group's loss, fury at Susan's entitlement, and a calculated hope. Her father's gift, the chance to relive this moment, was a weapon. The missed train was not her defeat, but Luke and Susan's first step toward ruin. The villagers scattered, some sobbing, others cursing Luke's name. Susan clung to Luke, her voice sugary. Don't worry, Luke'll fix this. Lena watched them, her resolve hardening like iron. The empty platform felt like a battlefield, the train's absence a marker of her new path. She would not chase salvation with them. She would wait, her father's justice guiding her, ready to turn their greed against them. As the sun dipped low, Lena's shadow stretched long, a silent vow to reclaim her life. The Henan train platform lay desolate under the fading July 1958 sun, the dust settling where the Zhengzhou train had vanished. The air was thick with the sting of lost dreams, and the villagers' referral letters, passports to factory jobs, were now useless in Luke's pocket. Lena stood apart, her reborn heart pulsing with the memory of Luke's betrayal, his rope around her neck in her past life. Her choice to let him face his consequences, refusing to drag him aboard, had led to this moment. The group stranded, their hopes crushed by Susan's delay. Yet Lena's calm exterior hid a brewing resolve, her father's voice, seek justice, a steady guide in her chest. Luke, the village chief's son, faced the group, his broad frame tense but unyielding. Susan clung to his arm, her earlier nonchalance replaced by a nervous glance at the angry villagers. Mike, his letter earned through his father's mind-collapsed death, kicked the platform's edge, his voice raw. You screwed us, Luke. My ma's dying, and now we're stuck. Lee, her mother, a martyred resistance fighter, clutched her letter, her eyes sharp. You and Susan cost us everything. What now? In 1950s China, factory jobs were a rare escape from rural toil, tightly controlled by a bureaucracy that favored martyrs' kin and elite connections. The missed train was a death sentence for their ambitions. Lena's gaze flickered between Luke and Susan, her emotions tangled with grief and calculation. Her past life's pain, Luke's murder and Susan's lies about being her father's goddaughter, fueled her anger. John Liang's martyr status, revered in a nation that built monuments to heroes, had secured her letter, but the chief's family had exploited it, stealing her pension and land while raising her as a servant. Her rebirth, a supernatural gift from her father's legacy, gave her clarity. Luke's control was a house of cards, and she would topple it. Her fingers grazed her grandfather's locket, grounding her as she watched the scene unfold. Luke raised a hand, his voice cutting through the group's murmurs. "Calm down. There's another way." His tone carried the chief's arrogance, a reminder of his father's sway in Hanan's county offices. In 3 days, a military unit passed through. "Our letters will get us to Zhengzhou. My dad's old friend, the Southern District Commander, won't turn us away." The words hung heavy, a lifeline dangled before the desperate. In the 1950s, the People's Liberation Army held immense power, often aiding rural communities with transport or jobs as part of Mao's nation building. Luke's claim, bold and specific, sparked a flicker of hope. Mike's shoulders eased, but his eyes narrowed. "How do you know this? You better not be lying." Lee's voice was skeptical. "The army's got their orders. Why would they care about us?" The villagers' hope was fragile. Their trust in Luke was eroded by his earlier threats to burn their letters. They'd relied on him, swayed by his father's influence, only to be burned by his loyalty to Susan. In a society where collective sacrifice was preached, Luke's selfishness was a wound, their resentment simmering beneath the surface. Lena's heart skipped, her reborn knowledge pricking at Luke's words. The military unit was real. She'd learned of it in her past life when Susan had tried and failed to join them without papers. Luke's certainty and precise timing felt too sharp and too knowing. Could he be reborn too, armed with the same foreknowledge? The thought chilled her father's murder at his hands flashing vividly. She studied his face, searching for a tell, a flicker of guilt, a shadow of her death, but found only his usual bravado. Her suspicion hardened her resolve to outmaneuver him growing. Stepping forward, Lena's voice was soft but pointed. "The military has its mission. They might not take us, letters or not." Her words were a calculated jab, testing Luke's confidence and sowing doubt. The villagers stirred Mike's brow, furrowing. "She's right. The army doesn't owe us." Lee nodded, her voice firm. "If this falls through, Luke, it's on you." Lena's doubt was a seed, planting unease in a group already fractured by betrayal. Her grief, for her stolen past, her father's exploited legacy, fueled her strategy. Let Luke's plan teeter, let his arrogance expose him. Luke's eyes flashed, his jaw tight. "Are you questioning me, Lena? My dad's connections got you all these spots. Without him, you'd be nothing." He waved the envelope, a taunt of his power. Susan, clinging to his arm, chimed in, her voice sugary. "Luke's got this. Trust him." Her smile was a mask, her earlier mirror-checking arrogance now tempered by the group's hostility. The villagers wavered, hope and resentment clashing. Mike muttered, "Connections don't mean squat if we're stranded." Lee's gaze lingered on Lena, a silent acknowledgement of her challenge. Lena's chest tightened, her emotions a storm. Fear of Luke's potential rebirth, anger at his manipulation, and cautious hope that her words would unravel his control. She saw her father's face in her mind, his sacrifice a beacon in a China that honored martyrs with fervent devotion. "I'm not questioning your dad," she said, her voice steady. "I'm saying the army isn't our pawn." Her restraint was deliberate, contrasting her past life's unquestioning loyalty. She would not confront Luke directly, not yet. She would wait, her father's justice a patient flame. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the platform. The villagers dispersed, their murmurs a mix of hope and doubt. Mike lingered, his voice low. "Lena, you're not like them. Keep pushing." Lee nodded, her eyes fierce. Luke and Susan walked off, his arm around her, their confidence a fragile veneer. Lena stood alone, the empty tracks a mirror of her resolve. If Luke were reborn, she'd match his cunning. If not, his greed would still be his undoing. Her path to justice, sparked by the missed train, was now a road she'd walk with eyes wide open. The Hannan village was a patchwork of mud brick homes and wilted fields cloaked in the twilight of July 1958. The missed train to Zhengzhou, a lost chance at factory jobs, hung over the villagers like a storm cloud, their referral letters now mere paper in Luke's pocket. Lena sat in her cramped room in the village chief's house, a flickering oil lamp casting shadows on the cracked walls. Her reborn soul, scarred by Luke's murder in her past life, pulsed with purpose. The phantom sting of his rope around her neck mingled with her father's voice. Seek justice, a beacon in her heart. Tonight she would strike back, her first step toward dismantling the lies that had stolen her legacy. Lena's desk, a wobbly plank, held a sheet of paper, an ink bottle, and her grandfather's locket, its worn surface a tether to her past. Her hands trembled as she dipped her pen, the weight of her plan pressing down. She'd been a dutiful orphan in her past life, blind to the chief's family's greed. They'd adopted her to claim her father's martyr pension and land, raising her as a servant while Susan, falsely posing as John Liang's goddaughter, flaunted dresses bought with Lena's inheritance. Luke, her fiancé, had been complicit, his love for Susan a betrayal that ended in Lena's death. Now, reborn through her father's supernatural gift, she saw their deception. In 1950s China, martyrs like John Liang were near divine, their sacrifices fueling Mao's vision of a new nation. The government's anti-corruption campaigns, launched to root out bureaucratic fraud, made martyr pensions sacred, their misuse a grave offense. Lena's letter to the provincial authorities would expose Luke and Susan's affair, Susan's forged goddaughter claim, and the chief's theft of her father's benefits. It would also cancel her engagement to Luke, severing the chief's hold over her. The risk was immense: retaliation from the chief's family, ostracism from the village, but Lena's fear was tempered by a fierce resolve. She began to write, her pen scratching in the quiet. To the Henan Provincial Committee, I, Lena Liang, daughter of martyr John Liang, report a grave injustice. Her words detailed Susan's lies, backed by the chief's forged letter, and Luke's complicity in exploiting her father's name for factory quotas. She listed the stolen pension payments, funneled to the chief's household, and the land her father had left her, now claimed by the family that raised her. Each sentence was a blade cutting through years of silence. Her hand shook, not from doubt, but from the raw pain of revisiting her stolen childhood. Lena's mind flashed to the platform, where Luke's match had threatened their letters, his loyalty to Susan dooming the group. Mike's voice, raw with fear for his sick mother, echoed in her ears. My ma needs this job. Lee's fierce plea, you're not our boss, had revealed the villagers' disillusionment. They'd trusted Luke, swayed by his father's clout, only to be betrayed. Their resentment simmered in a society where collective effort was preached, but fear of the chief's influence kept them silent. Lena's letter was a chance for them, too, to break the chief's grip on their futures. Her emotions churned: grief for her father's exploited legacy, guilt for her past compliance, and budding empowerment. She'd been a shadow in the chief's house, her voice stifled by gratitude and duty. Her rebirth gave her power, her father's gift, a mandate to reclaim her life. She paused, picturing her father's face, stern yet proud in his old photo. I'm doing this for you, she whispered, her tears smudging the ink. The letter wasn't just an accusation, it was liberation, a declaration that she was no longer their pawn. Finishing, Lena folded the letter, her hands steadier now. She slipped it into an envelope, addressing it to the provincial office in Kaifeng, known for its rigorous anti-corruption task force. The chief's influence reached far, but Mao's campaigns had emboldened officials to punish fraud, especially against martyrs' kin. Lena's status as John Liang's daughter gave her letter weight, a shield against dismissal. She hid the envelope under her mattress, her heart racing with fear and exhilaration. She'd face his wrath if the chief found out, but she trusted her father's spirit to guide her. Stepping outside, Lena gazed at the village, its lanterns glowing like fireflies. The villagers were scattered, their hope dimmed by the missed train. Mike had returned to his mother's bedside, his letter useless without transport. Lee cursed Luke's name, and her dream of honoring her mother's sacrifice faded. Their stakes, sick families, broken promises, mirrored Lena's trust in Luke, a shared wound. Lena's letter was a gamble, but it was also a spark, a chance to free them all from the chief's shadow. Back inside, Lena lit a match, its flame mirroring Luke's earlier threat. She held the match to a scrap of paper, watching it curl and blacken, a symbolic burning of her old self. The authorities' reply, if it came, would confirm her strike's impact, but for now, she'd wait, her plan, a secret flame. Her father's justice, rooted in a China that revered its heroes, was her weapon. As the lamp flickered out, Lena's resolve solidified. Luke and Susan thought they'd won, but her letter was a fuse, its spark racing toward their undoing. 3 days after the missed train, The Henan train platform hummed with nervous anticipation under the July 1958 sun. The villagers, their referral letters still held by Luke, gathered in a tight knot, their hope rekindled by his promise of a military unit's aid. Lena stood among them, her reborn soul burning with the memory of Luke's betrayal, his rope around her neck, his love for Susan. Her secret letter to the provincial authorities, exposing their lies and the chief's corruption, was a hidden fuse, its spark racing toward justice. Her father's voice, "Seek justice," steadied her, but her heart churned with anger and caution, knowing the military encounter could shift her plan's course. The village chief's son, Luke, stood at the platform's center, Susan at his side. His confidence, bolstered by his father's supposed connections, masked the group's earlier fury over the missed train. Susan's earlier arrogance, tempered by the villagers' resentment, adjusted her scarf, her eyes darting nervously. Mike, his letter tied to his father's mind collapsed death, muttered, "This better work, Luke. My ma's running out of time." Lee, her mother, a martyred resistance fighter, gripped her letter, her voice low. "If the army says no, we're done." In 1950s China, the People's Liberation Army wielded immense authority, often aiding rural communities with transport or jobs, but their priorities were military, not civilian. Lena's gaze lingered on Luke, her suspicion sharp. His precise knowledge of the military unit, absent in her past life until after the train's loss, hinted he might be reborn too, a possibility that chilled her. Her letter, sent to Kaifeng's anti-corruption task force, accused Luke and Susan of fraud, Susan's false claim as John Liang's goddaughter, their affair, and the chief's theft of Lena's martyr's pension. In a nation that revered martyrs like her father, such lies were a grave offense, especially amid Mao's anti-corruption drive. Lena's plan required patience, but the military's response could expose cracks in Luke's facade. The rumble of engines broke the silence, and a green military truck rolled into view, dust swirling in its wake. A stern officer, his uniform crisp, stepped out, flanked by two soldiers. The villagers straightened, their hope fragile. Luke strode forward, Susan at his heels, the envelope of referral letters in hand. "Comrade," he said, his voice smooth, "we missed the train to Zhengzhou. These are children of martyrs, myself included, with letters for factory jobs. My father, the village chief, knows the southern district commander. Please help us reach the city." Susan stepped up, her eyes brimming with practiced tears. "My godfather, John Liang, died a martyr, killed charging a Japanese tank. These letters honor his sacrifice. For his sake, take us." Her voice trembled, her grief a performance honed to exploit China's martyr worship. Luke produced a forged letter from the chief, claiming Susan's tie to John Liang. The villagers shifted uneasily, aware of Susan's dubious claim, but silenced by their reliance on Luke's plan. Mike's jaw tightened, his mother's illness a silent plea. Lee's eyes flickered to Lena, a question unspoken. "Will you speak?" Lena's heart raced, her anger at Susan's lie clashing with her strategic restraint. Her father's legacy, sacred in a nation that built shrines to heroes, was being defiled. In her past life, she'd stayed silent, bound by duty to the chief's family, who raised her while stealing her inheritance. Now, reborn, she saw their greed clearly. Susan's dresses, Luke's arrogance, all funded by her father's pension. Her letter to the authorities was her weapon, but exposing them now risked derailing the investigation. She needed the military to doubt, not decide. The officer's gaze sharpened, his voice clipped. "John Liang had a goddaughter?" He turned to Lena, whose letter bore her father's name. "Comrade, is this true?" The platform stilled, all eyes on her. Luke's stare was a warning, Susan's a plea. Lena's emotions surged, grief for her father's tarnished name, fear of the chief's retaliation, and a fierce resolve to chip away at their lies. Her fingers brushed her grandfather's locket, grounding her. She smiled faintly, her voice calm but pointed. "The chief wrote that letter, but I never knew Susan as family." Her words were a scalpel, precise and ambiguous, planting doubt without accusation. The villagers stirred, Mike's breath hitching, Lee's nod subtle but approving. They'd whispered about Susan's claim, their resentment of Luke's favoritism festering, but fear of the chief's influence, his sway over village jobs and rations, kept them quiet. In a society where collective harmony was preached, their complicity was a survival tactic, their hope tied to Luke's gamble. Lena's restraint was a signal. She was no longer their pawn. The officer frowned, examining the forged letter and then Lena's documents. His expression softened at her father's name, a martyr's daughter commanding respect. "Comrade Liang, board the truck," he said, his tone firm. To Luke and Susan, he added, "You too, for now. We'll verify your claims in Zhengzhou." Luke's relief was palpable, Susan's smile tight. The villagers scrambled aboard, their hope rekindled but fragile. Mike muttered, "Lena, you're playing smart." Lee's glance held respect, a shared defiance against Luke's control. Lena climbed into the truck, her heart a storm of caution and empowerment. Her letter to Kaifeng was a ticking clock, its accusations poised to unravel Luke and Susan's lies. The military's scrutiny was her first victory, a crack in their armor. As the truck rumbled toward Zhengzhou, Susan's hand brushed Luke's, her whisper inaudible but smug. Lena watched, her resolve a quiet flame. Her father's justice, rooted in a China that punished fraud against heroes, was near. She would wait, her doubt a weapon, ready to watch their deception collapse. The Zhengzhou skyline loomed through the military truck's dust-streaked windows, its factory smokestacks contrasting with Henan's endless fields. It was late July 1958, and the villagers, their referral letters intact, had reached the city after the military's reluctant aid. Lena sat in the truck's cramped hold, her reborn soul alight with purpose. The memory of Luke's rope around her neck and his betrayal of Susan fueled her resolve. Her secret letter to Kaifeng's provincial authorities, accusing Luke and Susan of fraud, exposing their affair and the chief's theft of her father's martyr pension, was a hidden blade, its edge poised to strike. Her father's voice, "Seek justice," steadied her, but her heart churned with rage and caution, knowing the city would test her restraint. Luke and Susan sat across from her, their confidence restored by the urban bustle. Luke's broad frame relaxed, his hand brushing Susan's as he whispered assurances. Susan, her scarf neatly tied, flashed a smug smile, her earlier nervousness on the platform forgotten. Mike, his letter tied to his father's mind-collapsed death, stared out the window, his voice low. "I hope this factory's worth it. My ma's counting on me." Lee, her mother, a martyred resistance fighter, clutched her letter, muttering, "Luke better not mess this up again." In 1950s China, cities like Zhengzhou were beacons of progress, their factories offering wages and status to rural folk. Still, access was fiercely guarded, reserved for those with martyr ties or elite favor. Lena's gaze lingered on Susan, her anger flaring at the memory of her lies. Susan's false claim as John Leung's goddaughter, backed by the chief's forged letter, had siphoned Lena's father's pension, funding Susan's comforts while Lena scrubbed floors in the chief's house. In a nation that enshrined martyrs, such fraud was a betrayal of Mao's vision, punishable under the anti-corruption campaigns sweeping Henan. Lena's letter to Kaifeng was a ticking clock, its accusations of Susan's deception and Luke's complicity set to unravel their scheme. But she needed patience. The authorities' investigation required time, and premature confrontation could shield her targets. The truck halted outside the textile factory, its brick walls humming with the clatter of looms. The villagers disembarked, their eyes wide at the city's scale. Luke strode forward, Susan at his side, acting as if he'd single-handedly secured their passage. "See? I told you I'd get us here," he boasted, waving the envelope of letters. Susan leaned into him, her voice sugary. "Luke's our hero." The villagers bristled their resentment of Luke's earlier threats, his match hovering over their letters, still raw. Mike's jaw tightened. "Hero? You nearly burned our chances." Lee's eyes narrowed, her patience thin. Susan caught Lena's gaze and sauntered, a new watch glinting on her wrist. "Like it?" she whispered, her smile venomous. "Your father's compensation paid for this. Luke says I'm delicate and need pampering." Lena's blood boiled, her past life's hunger flashing vivid, pale and thin, while Susan thrived on stolen funds. In the 1950s, martyr pensions were sacred, and their misuse was a crime that could spark public outrage. Lena's fingers clenched her urge to lash out, warring with her plan. Her letter had detailed this theft, and the authorities' response would be her justice. She forced a neutral expression, her voice low. "I hope you enjoy it while it lasts." Luke overheard, his eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" He stepped closer, his tone sharp. You owe us, Lena. Without me, you and Susan wouldn't be here. His entitlement was galling, a reminder of his past life's murder, his love for Susan over her. The villagers watched, their frustration palpable. Mike muttered, Owe you? You held our letters hostage. Lee's glance at Lena had a flicker of respect, sensing her restraint. Their reliance on Luke, born of the chief's influence over village resources, was a bitter chain, their hope now tied to the factory's acceptance. Lena's heart pounded her emotions. Rage at Susan's taunts, grief for her father's defiled legacy, and cautious empowerment. Her rebirth had given her clarity. Luke and Susan's arrogance was a weakness, their lies a rope they'd tied themselves. She recalled her father's photo and his stern pride and drew strength. I don't owe you anything, she said, her voice steady. We're here because of our letters, not your promises. Her words were a subtle challenge, a refusal to bow to Luke's control, yet measured to avoid tipping her hand. Mike stepped in, his voice urgent. Enough. We need to check in at the factory, not fight. His mother's illness drove his focus, a reminder of the villagers' stakes, sick families, broken dreams, mirroring Lena's own. Lee nodded, her eyes on Lena. Let's move before Luke screws us again. The group shuffled toward the factory gates, their hope fragile but alive. Luke glared at Lena, his hand tightening on Susan's arm. Watch yourself, he hissed, leading Susan away. Susan cast a smug glance back, her watch catching the sunlight, a taunt Lena burned to answer. Lena followed her resolve, a quiet flame. Her letter to Kai Fong was her accurate weapon, its accusations poised to topple Luke and Susan's lies. The factory loomed, symbolizing the urban dream, but it was a battlefield for Lena. Her restraint was strategic, her silence a trap. In a China that punished fraud against martyrs, her father's justice was near. As the villagers entered the factory, Lena's shadow trailed long, her patience a coiled spring, ready to unleash the consequences of their greed. The Zhengzhou textile factory buzzed with the clatter of looms and the weight of ambition in late July 1958. The air was thick with cotton dust, and the scrutiny of reporters was drawn to the arrival of rural youths with martyrs' referral letters. Lena stood among the villagers, her reborn soul alight with anticipation. Her secret letter to Kai Fong's provincial authorities, detailing Luke and Susan's fraud, their affair, and the village chief's theft of her father's martyr pension, had set a trap now springing shut. The memory of Luke's rope around her neck, his betrayal for Susan, fueled her resolve, but her heart churned with satisfaction and lingering pain, knowing this moment would redefine her life. Her father's voice, "Seek justice," was a steady pulse, guiding her through the chaos. Luke and Susan basked in the spotlight, their earlier arrogance amplified by the city's glare. Luke, the chief's son, puffed his chest, waving the referral letters as if he'd earned them. Susan, her scarf pristine, posed for the cameras, her voice dripping with rehearsed sorrow. I'm the daughter of John Liang, the war martyr who died charging a Japanese tank. I came to Zhengzhou to honor his dream for our nation. Her lie, a calculated theft of Lena's father's legacy, was a bold play in a China that revered martyrs as near-sacred heroes. Luke said, My father, the village chief, secured these spots for martyrs' kin. I made sure we got here despite setbacks. His glance at Lena carried a warning, stay silent, or else. The villagers shifted uneasily, their resentment of Luke's earlier threats, his match over their letters, still raw. Mike, his letter tied to his father's mind, collapsed death, clenched his fists, his mother's illness a silent spur. They're lying through their teeth, he muttered, but fear of the chief's influence, which controlled village rations, held him back. Lee, her mother, a martyred resistance fighter, whispered, Susan's no martyr's kid. Everyone knows it. Yet their reliance on Luke's leadership, a vestige of rural hierarchy, kept them quiet in a 1950s society that prized collective harmony over confrontation. Lena's heart pounded, her anger at Susan's brazen theft of her father's name, warring with her strategic patience. She'd swallowed such lies in her past life, bound by duty to the chief's family who raised her while stealing her inheritance. Her letter to Kai Fong, sent amid Mao's anti-corruption campaigns, had accused Susan of forging her goddaughter's claim, and Luke of abetting the fraud, crimes that could spark public outrage in a nation cracking down on bureaucratic deceit. Lena's silence now was a weapon, her restraint letting Luke and Susan climb higher, their fall all the steeper. Her fingers brushed her grandfather's locket, grounding her resolve. Reporters swarmed Susan, their questions fervent. John Liang's daughter? The hero who killed a dozen Japanese soldiers? Susan nodded, a tear glistening, her performance flawless. Luke stood tall, claiming credit for the group's journey. The villagers' faces reddened, their silence a mix of shame and survival. Mike's hands shook his urge to speak, stifled by his mother's dependence on village aid. Lee's eyes met Lena's, a flicker of admiration for her calm. Lena stepped back, her expression neutral, her heart thrilling at the trap's tightening. Her father's legacy, sacred in Hanan's martyr shrines, would not be defiled much longer. The factory supervisor burst through the gates, his face a storm of fury, flanked by stern-faced staff. "You two," he barked, pointing at Luke and Susan. "To the office now." He slammed a stack of referral letters onto the ground, the forged one bearing Susan's name glaringly false. "Did you dare forge documents and pose as martyr's kin?" His voice echoed, the crowd gasping. Reporters' cameras flashed, capturing Susan's faltering smile and Luke's paling face. The supervisor's words cut deep. "The military district's investigation, prompted by a citizen's report, confirms your fraud. You've dishonored a hero's legacy." Susan's legs buckled, her voice a stammer. "No, I'm his goddaughter. It's a mistake." She clutched Luke's arm, her tears now real. Luke, sweating, tried to deflect. "This is slander. Our letters are legitimate." But the supervisor's glare silenced him. "You colluded to abuse connections and steal martyrs' quotas. Disgraceful." In 1950s China, such crimes were anathema, fueling public ire amid anti-corruption purges. Lena's letter had struck true, its accusations validated by the military's swift probe, a testament to her father's revered name. Luke's eyes darted to Lena, panic breaking his facade. "You did this! You set us up!" Susan's gaze followed, her fear turning to accusation. Lena stepped behind a reporter, her voice soft but firm. "I couldn't let someone claim my father's name." The crowd erupted, reporters shouting, "You're John Liang's real daughter?" Cameras swarmed Lena, her calm defiance a stark contrast to Susan's collapse. Mike's face lit with vindication, muttering, "About time." Lee nodded, her respect for Lena clear. The villagers' silence broke, their whispers of Susan's fraud now bold, and their loyalty to Luke shattered. Police officers stormed in, their uniforms crisp. "You're under arrest for forging documents and dishonoring a martyr's legacy," one declared, cuffing Luke. Susan sobbed, her voice shrill. "It was Luke! He forced me!" Luke's eyes widened, betrayal twisting his face. "Susan, you liar!" Their unity crumbled, their accusations a mirror of their greed. Lena watched, her satisfaction tempered by the pain of her past life's murder. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Luke, our engagement's over. I know what you did." Her words, veiled with the weight of her death, struck him like a blow, his pupils dilating in shock. The police dragged them away, sirens wailing as the crowd cheered. Lena stood still, her relief a quiet tide, her father's justice fulfilled. The villagers patted her shoulder, Mike's voice gruff. "You did right, Lena." Lee's nod was fierce. They had it coming. Lena's heart, though lighter, carried the scar of her past. Her letter had toppled their lies, but her journey wasn't over. As the factory gates loomed, she vowed to reclaim her father's legacy, her strength a beacon for the road ahead. The Zhengzhou textile factory hummed with the rhythm of looms in August 1958, its brick halls a sanctuary for Lena and the villagers who had secured their jobs after Luke and Susan's arrest. Lena, now 20, worked the factory floor by day, her hands deft with cotton threads, but by night, under a dim lamp in her dormitory cot, she became a warrior of justice. Her reborn soul, forged in the pain of Luke's betrayal, his rope around her neck in her past life, carried a quiet strength. Her letter to Kai Feng's authorities had toppled Luke and Susan's lies, but the village chief's more profound corruption, the theft of her father's martyr pension and land, demanded reckoning. Her father's voice, "Seek justice," guided her, her heart a mix of healing and lingering guilt for her past silence. Lena's desk held a growing stack of notes, each page a meticulous record of the chief's abuses. She documented the pension payments siphoned to his household, the land her father, John Liang, had left her, now claimed as the chief's own, and the village resources he'd hoarded through favoritism. In 1950s China, Mao's anti-corruption campaigns targeted such fraud, especially against martyrs' kin, whose legacies were sacred in a nation rebuilt on sacrifice. Lena's status as John Liang's daughter, a hero who died charging a Japanese tank, gave her report weight, but she needed an ally to ensure its impact. Her thoughts turned to Grandpa Gu, her father's mentor, whose name she'd found in an old photo tucked in her grandfather's locket. Grandpa Gu, a retired military officer, had trained John Liang in the resistance, and their bond was forged during Henan's wartime struggles. In her past life, Gu had aided Luke, misled by the chief's lies about Lena's care. Now, Lena saw him as her key to justice. She wrote to him in Kaifeng, enclosing her report and keeping her pen steady despite the emotional storm. "Dear Comrade Gu," she began, "I am Lena, daughter of John Liang. Your friend's legacy has been stolen." Her words detailed the chief's crimes, her exploitation as an orphan adopted to secure her inheritance, and the village's suffering under his greed. Each sentence was a step toward healing, a reclaiming of her voice. The villagers, now factory workers, carried their scars from Luke's betrayal. Mike, his letter earned through his father's mine collapse death, worked tirelessly, sending wages to his ailing mother. "You did us right, Lena," he said one evening, his voice gruff but grateful. "Luke and Susan had us fooled." Lee, her mother, a martyred resistance fighter, nodded, her eyes fierce. "The chief's next. He's been fleecing us for years." Their relief was tempered by caution, the chief's influence over their families back home a lingering threat. In a society valuing collective harmony, their support for Lena was quiet, their hope pinned on her courage. Lena's emotions swirled, guilt for her past compliance in the chief's house, where she'd scrubbed floors while Susan wore dresses bought with her father's pension, empowerment from her letter's success, and a tentative peace as she honored her father. One night, she slipped to a hill overlooking Zhengzhou, a makeshift shrine for her father and grandfather. Kneeling, she whispered, "I'm making it right." Tears fell, not just for her loss, but for the strength she'd found. Her rebirth, a gift from her father's martyr legacy, had given her this chance, and she would not falter. Weeks later, a summons came from the factory supervisor. Lena entered his office, her heart racing, to find an older man in a faded military uniform, Grandpa Gu. His weathered face, familiar from her grandfather's photo, softened as he stood. "Lena, child," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I've read your report." Rimmed with tears, his eyes held guilt for trusting the chief's family. "I failed your father, thinking you were cared for. I'm so sorry." In 1950s China, such personal accountability was rare, a testament to his bond with John Liang, forged in the resistance's darkest days. Lena's throat tightened, her pain easing at his sincerity. "You didn't know, Grandpa Gu, but you can help now." She recounted her story, the chief's theft, her exploitation, and the village's suffering. Gu nodded, his resolve firm. "Your father was my pride. I'll see this through." His military connections, untainted by the chief's local sway, gave him leverage in Henan's anti-corruption task force. Lena's report, backed by his authority, sparked a swift investigation, a ripple of Mao's campaign to purge fraud against martyrs' kin. By October, the truth emerged. The chief had stolen Lena's pension, land, and home, profiting off her father's legacy while renting out his property. He was stripped of his position and sentenced to prison, and his family's influence was shattered. With Gu's aid, Lena's inheritance was restored, her father's land, home, and back pension payments. The villagers cheered quietly, Mike's grin wide. "You're a force, Lena." Lee's nod was fierce. No one will mess with John Liang's daughter now. Their support, once cautious, was now open, their faith in Lena a mirror of their own reclaimed dignity. Lena returned to the hill, her father's shrine aglow with candlelight. "It's done," she whispered, her tears of relief and closure. Her guilt, once a weight, lifted, her empowerment, a steady flame. Her rebirth avened only her death and restored her father's honor in a China that cherished its heroes. As the city lights sparkled below, Lena felt her heart mend, her path forward clear. The factory awaited, but her work, honoring her father's legacy, was complete, her strength a beacon for the future. In June 2018, Henan's fields bloomed with progress, a far cry from the dusty village of 1958. Lena, now 80, stepped off a sleek car onto the familiar soil, her gray hair neatly pinned, her eyes sharp with the wisdom of decades. A renowned industrialist, she'd built a textile empire from her Zhengzhou factory days, her name synonymous with resilience. Invited to share her story with the village's youth, she returned to a transformed community, mud huts replaced by tidy townhouses, a public square alive with children's laughter. Her reborn soul, once scarred by Luke's betrayal, his rope around her neck in her past life, now carried a quiet peace, her father's voice, seek justice, a fulfilled echo. Yet her heart stirred with reflection, the past a shadow she'd come to lay to rest. Modernized by China's economic boom, the village honored martyrs like John Liang, whose name graced a new memorial hall. In the 1950s, his sacrifice had won Lena a factory job, a chance stolen by the village chief's greed and Luke and Susan's lies. Her letter to Kai Feng, exposing their fraud, and Grandpa Gu's aid had restored her inheritance, land, pension, and home, while toppling the chief. Lena's success was now a beacon. Her story of overcoming betrayal was a lesson for a nation that revered its heroes, even in 2018's high-tech era. Her return was a homecoming, but also a final reckoning with the ghosts of her past. The new village chief, a humble man in his 50s, greeted Lena warmly, his eyes bright with respect. He said, "You're our pride, Comrade Lena," leading her through the square. Young and old villagers clapped their admiration, which was starkly contrasting to the desperation of the 1958 platform. Mike's daughter, now a teacher, hugged her. "Dad always said you saved us from Luke's mess." Lee's son, a local official, nodded. "You gave us the courage to stand up." Their families had thrived in Zhengzhou, their gratitude rooted in Lena's 1958 defiance, a ripple that reshaped the village's spirit in a China valuing collective progress. Lena's emotions swirled, pride in her impact, relief at the village's transformation, and a lingering ache for her lost years. She'd spent decades building her empire, but nights revisiting her father's shrine, whispering apologies for her early silence. Her rebirth, a gift from John Liang's martyr legacy, had fueled her justice. But peace came slower, and her hatred for Luke and Susan was a weight she'd carried too long. She spoke to the youth at the memorial hall, her voice steady. "Honor your roots, but fight for what's right." The crowd cheered her story, a bridge between 1950's sacrifice and 2018's ambition. After the event, the chief pulled Lena aside, his tone hesitant. "There's something you should know." He sighed, glancing west. "Luke and Susan, after prison, ended up together. They're broken." Lena tilted her head, her heart unmoved. "Are they?" she asked, her voice light, their names distant echoes. The chief frowned. "Luke, a drunk, stumbles around, yelling about his factory days. Susan's bitter and fights him constantly. They lost a child last year." His pity was clear, but Lena felt only a faint curiosity. Her hatred had long faded in a China that had outgrown their greed. The next morning, Lena wandered to the village's western edge, the fields dotted with solar panels. Two figures argued near a sagging shack, Luke and Susan, aged and worn. Luke, his hair streaked white, slouched in threadbare clothes, a far cry from the chief's proud son. Susan, her face lined with resentment, hurled insults, her once pristine scarf tattered. "You're nothing now," she spat. "Lena's back, and you're moping," Luke's voice was slurred. "I know I'm worthless. A failure like me deserves you." Their venom was a self-made prison, their lives a shadow of Lena's triumph. Lena watched, unseen, her emotions a calm tide. Once their betrayal had consumed her, but now they were strangers, their misery their creation. Susan's eyes caught hers, and she froze, color draining from her face. "Lena," she stammered, rushing forward, her voice sharp. "You ruined me! All this is your fault!" Lena met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Susan, your greed destroyed you." Her words, soft but firm, carried decades of truth. Luke stumbled toward her, his eyes desperate. "Lena, I regret everything. I've divorced Susan. Let's start over." Lena's lips curved, not in anger but pity. "You don't know me anymore, Luke. I'm free." She turned, her steps light, but Susan's scream followed. "You'll pay!" Luke grabbed Susan, their argument reigniting a futile cycle of blame. Lena walked on, her heart untouched. At the village's martyr memorial, she knelt before her father's plaque, a breeze carrying the scent of wheat. "It's over," she whispered, tears falling, not of pain, but peace. Her rebirth had avenged his legacy, and her hatred dissolved in a China that honored its heroes through progress. The village square glowed with lanterns as Lena prepared to leave, the chief and villagers waving farewell. Mike's daughter pressed a photo of the old platform into her hand, a reminder of 1958's fight. Lee's son smiled. "You're our hero, like your father." Lena's heart swelled, her journey complete. Her empire awaited, but this moment, her father's spirit, the village's renewal, was her true victory. As her car pulled away, the field stretched wide, her future bright, her peace a gentle flame honoring John Liang's eternal sacrifice.